This week on Conduit Connections, learn how effective communication both internally and externally will help your agency be more efficient and help your clients be more successful and happier.
This week we're talking about effective communication. I think we talk about externally to clients from the agency's perspective, as well as internally through other business departments, as well as partners. All right. I think throughout this conversation, I'd like to really talk about three key areas. So we'll talk about the benefits of effective communication, how to effectively communicate, and then what are some tools or tricks that I know you use, but we could talk about how the collective group uses. Let's kick things off with how to effectively communicate.
There's several ways to really communicate effectively. My favorite one is definitely just coming off in a really positive way, because that's how your clients will listen to you and really be engaged and kind of be more influenced by what you're saying. A lot of times when you're communicating, sometimes people could just read a message and what you're trying to say isn't really getting through to them. Another way to really communicate effectively is to always remember the client's goal. What's the intent that's really going on? Like, what are they saying to you and why are they saying it to you? I think that's something that really gets mixed up in digital marketing, especially when you offer a full suite of products. The goals of the products could sometimes, mix up what the client is really looking for when they're talking about something specific.
I think understanding the intent and then anticipating the follow-up questions is so important.
Oh, yes.
So one thing that I've learned, throughout 6 years of doing this was just responding to the question that they asked is okay communication, but if you've been in this long enough, you can kind of know where that question's going. So if you anticipate the next question and you can communicate.
Yeah.
Exactly.
No, yeah, having that intuition. I mean, communication.
Are you actually riffing off of
Yeah, I
that
am. Yeah. No, I agree with that though. Yeah, he did. No, that was a great point. That really was, because communication it's an art. It truly is. And it's like dancing, like you need to know exactly where your client is going to go next, because that in turn will save time for not only them, but internally as well. So if you can get ahead of what the next steps will even be and just, nail them right there in one single effective communication message out, that's amazing.
I think it's going to make communication more effective.
Yeah.
Right? And that's really the benefit of what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
Communication can go in so many different ways. There's so many channels to communicate in. We have Slack, we have email, we have telephone, we have social, whatever it may be. There's so many different ways to communicate. I think if we're able to see the next steps and the objections up front, let's anticipate those and communicate there. And then once that's established, then really it comes down to actionable next steps, right? Those are super, super important. Jess, could you talk a little bit about how you like to leverage your actionable next steps in really the end of your communication that leads to the future of communication?
Yeah. A great way to always do this is always just to reiterate back to the client or the meeting what exactly is going to happen after. I know obviously they come up in your conversation, but once you repeat it, it kind of sets that in stone. And that's so important, because later on it could get mixed up as we go down the road. Also following up on those next steps and making sure that they actually get done. I think that's also very important, especially when we're communicating with clients. Sometimes a next step could be in limbo because they actually didn't understand what actually that next step entailed. So that's so important to follow up and make sure that you're not going to cause a roadblock down the road and that everything actually gets completed.
How do we communicate effectively internally?
So we have a super defined process internally that we communicate. So we have our own platforms that we work on, and it's kind of the analyst job. When the question comes in, it'll get sent to us from the experience team, and then on the ad op side, it's really our job to put things in layman's terms, not just for the client experience team, but to going out externally for clients as well, right? So I kind of like to bring it back to the data tells a story, and as an analyst in ad ops, you kind of have to be able to read that data, right? And then provide it in layman's terms so that the client has it's easy to understand for them, right? So the first step is kind of reading that and putting it into a way that it's easily digestible and easily understandable, because at the end of the day, we've talked about this before, like no one cares about like a click or a click-through rate or anything. Like what comes from that, right? So maybe talking about high engagement or what's performing better and putting it in those terms, because it's our job to analyze it, and we provide that to our client experience team, and then through that effective internal communication, they can put that communication externally.
I think impactful and simple communication is so important, especially on the AdOps end, on our end, because so often this turns into a game of telephone. So we see something, then we're letting our client experience team know, and then they're letting the people at the agency know, and then they're letting the client know. And if we're not crystal clear to start, the message is completely muddled by the end, and then what we get back is almost, that has nothing to do with what we had initially intended. So making sure that it's definable, it's clear, and it's easy to digest, I think is super important for us to communicate on our side.
And we always.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
We always want to, when we receive anything from the product teams, we're always putting ourselves in the position of the end client. So when we're reading it, we're always thinking, would an HVAC owner of this company understand the message? And if we think it's not clear, you'll see us in the background of all of these videos walking back and forth, because instead of just slacking, the product team's like, hey, we don't understand this, I don't think the client's going to grasp this, is there anything we can dive in further here? We'll just get up and walk to you guys as well, just so we can fully comprehend what's going on, because that's what really allows us to nail down the communication that has to go out.
I think it's super important to understand who the audience is, right? If we're talking internally, right, exactly everything you guys talked about. It's the process that it takes to get one piece of communication to the right people and then back with the right answers, right? That's important. But if we look externally now and talk about agencies speaking to clients, right? We're going to take a minute to talk on that, because I think it's super important to understand who the audience is. If you're dealing with executives and CEO level conversations, they want, to the point, 3 bullets, you tell me at the high level what is going on. You may have a director of marketing that's more into the analytics and the data side of things, so you want to elaborate a little bit more. You also may have someone who they really want to be bubbly, they want to be, just feel good in all the communication, and maybe drag out a little bit longer because you're adding more to explanation points and so forth. But I think it's important to understand the audience. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think that the same question being asked to our team could be answered in 14 different ways depending on who's asking that. So if you are talking to someone that's going to their board of directors, hit the highlights. They're just looking for the successes. If you are talking to the marketing person that might want a deeper dive, I think you can give them as much information as possible. So if you're looking at just how's our campaign going, that's a more generic question. But in this space, there are going to be some complex questions that can answer that can't have a simple and concise, response to it that would get muddled in the game of telephone. So what I found to work most effectively there is just go into a Google Doc and mapping it out, making it very clear to read. But in some cases, a response might be a 2-page, Google Doc that they're going to answer to, and including screenshots. Doing whatever you can to make it easy so that the agency can just forward your response to the client. I know that if we're looking at like analytics, clients goof up analytics all the time in terms of what they're asking for from us, and trying to explain that can be challenging. I found that including screenshots is helpful. I think that when you're putting these docs together, it's important to have an intro, the meat, and then an end. And the way I view that is tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. So you're getting 3 frequency on these messages, and if you can include visuals, I think that's super helpful.
Yeah.
That comes back to what we talked about before when just talking about the recaps. So I know, we had a call yesterday, and when you're talking on the phone with certain people, it's about tailoring that message. And if they have questions about analytics or whatever it is, you can answer them on the phone, but some of that stuff is super comprehensive, and it's always good to send that recap with kind of that detailed list that you just mentioned with screenshots, just so they have it on paper if they ever need to refer back to it, and they have it.
Yeah, it's just a great way to set expectations.
Setting expectations is important, because good, effective communication sets the expectations.
Yeah.
And I think that's super important to the overall conversation and how agencies should be communicating effectively, right? Setting expectations. It's not easy when people have a perception that's not the reality. And then the communication of that is really going to be important. And I love the fact that you just mentioned screenshots with a story. right? If there's screenshots with a story, that's really the benefit of that is going to be there's not going to be any ambiguity. This is the visual. This is what you want to say. It's tough to do that when there is that ambiguity and it's just out there, and it's like, well, I love what you said, right? It's the frequency. Right? And say that again, because I think that's going to be captured. It's going to be over everyone's head. I like tell them what you're going to tell them.
Tell them, and tell them what you told them.
I think that should be highlighted everywhere in this video, because that's super important. The frequency of it, I think the consistency of it, of communication, that's how effective communication is really done.
I think on the agency side, this ties back into the feed your head discussion that we had last week or 2 weeks ago, because we had talked about setting expectations. And I think that effective communication does set expectations, and I know Tim, our CEO, always says, win your bets on the first tee. So just set yourself up for success so that you're not scrambling later. An example of this would be if you are going to be out there talking about OTT, make sure you understand that whether you're offering this at a price point where Hulu is accessible or it's not. Because if you just are talking, oh, OTT generically, everyone's got that. People are thinking Netflix, people are thinking Hulu, people are thinking these big names. If your client doesn't understand that there's this whole other world out there of OTT through Pluto, through Tubi, that's going to be more in their price range, could potentially get them more bang for their buck at this point, then they see the report and it's like, oh, where's Hulu in this report? You've have provided the best results possible, but you lost the client because proper expectations weren't set up front. I think that's so important to make sure that you understand what you're selling and you communicate clearly what the client's receiving.
Yeah. I think wrapping things up and no ambiguity is going to be really critical to effective communication, both internally and externally. Let's flip the script a little bit and talk about what are examples of poor communication. Does anyone have any ideas on what poor communication looks like? And
It's a mess. It's just disorganized. It's not fun. You never really nobody strives for poor communication, but wait.
what's just give me an example of poor communication.
All of the poor communication examples I could think of, they always stem from the same thing. It's when you don't set the client's expectation right from the start. So that just stems back to what you were just saying, and having a great onboard process, really, and mapping out the whole journey that the client will go on. That just completely avoids the poor communication. I can't say we have any here at Conduit. No.
Good plug.
I'm kidding. Sorry, I didn't do it that way. So.
I think that when you're dealing in this space, you're dealing with egos a lot of times.
That's a good point.
You're dealing with egos at the agency, you're dealing with egos from the client.
Yep.
And I know that our favorite combination here is dealing with people that tend to be a little ignorant and a little arrogant.
Yeah.
I think that if people are communicating poorly, communicating aggressively, communicating angrily at you, which is just part of the world that we live in, the way that you can combat that on your end and the way that we like to combat that on our end is just with facts.
Yep.
So you can have your own opinion, but you can't have your own facts. So if someone's coming at you aggressively, coming at you angrily, I think that responding with no emotion should always be the response back. If you feed in the emotion that you got from them, you've already lost.
Yep.
So if you respond back strictly factual, highlight the points, and then if you close it with trying to help them understand what you had just presented and that you're trying to help them, it's a little bit of a gut check to them, and that comes like, I came at you strong, and then you came back with facts, supported those facts, and then offered to help me at the end.
When you're diffusing situations like that, though, it's also important to let the client know that you have empathy and you understand that we are taking in consideration how they feel.
Having it organized is so important to the efficiency of everything.
Yeah.
And when people are just shooting off messages, or it's a message that, like Rob said, it's just coming off just wrong and bad and just aggressive. Because this would be an interesting topic to talk about, is just the aggressive nature of text, right, versus a phone call, and understanding the emotions. Because some people write things out and it seems very harsh and it's very direct, but really they're smiling on the other end. That doesn't come across in email or Slack or something like that, which is I think is just interesting overall.
That's why I think that in work communication, people use exclamation points 450 times more frequently than they do in personal communication. It's because
Exclamation
I need
point.
you to know I'm not being a jerk on the other end of this.
Smiley face,
exclamation
emoji,
point.
throw it in there.
Yeah.
I think that's how poor communication can be disguised, by throwing in those things. But one last thing I want to talk about before we go into tricks is not everything is sunshine and rainbows. And breaking bad news or something that went wrong is an acquired, learned ability. Can we talk a little bit about just ways that we can effectively break bad news?
Yeah.
And I say bad news because things always go. It's just the nature of the world where things would just go wrong. But being able to have that conversation, you have to do it with a client.
Yeah.
Can we talk a little bit about that? Because I think it's an interesting topic. I think people would be interested in hearing about how to do that effectively.
Sorry, yeah. I think there's a lot of ways that you can go about that, but I think every effective way of breaking bad news comes down and has a foundation of one aspect, and it's honesty. If you try and hide anything, it's going to come back to bite you, and it's going to end the relationship.
Yep.
So if there's something negative that happened, if there was underspend, you ran the wrong creative, there was the overspend, which has somehow been a problem, brought up to us before. Whatever it may be, if you just fall on your sword, acknowledge what happened up front, and then provide steps to resolve that solution. When it takes 7 emails back and forth between you and the agency or you and the client to have the truth kind of come out, it's lost. The relationship's gone at that point.
I think it's so much of it. I think is also getting out in front of it. For if something were to ever happen, you should never hide it. And we preach transparency. We have our live report. Like if there ever to be a situation where a creative did run the wrong dates or something like that, it's always important to get out in front of it and not hide behind it. So it goes right back to setting expectations and what you talked about with being honest. If anything like that ever happens, it's just reaching out before
I
even
think
they even
the
notice it.
key word is proactive.
Yep.
Right? Proactive communication is going to proactive communication of the truth is just going to create a good partnership, because a good partner knows that everything doesn't go perfect every time.
Absolutely.
And I think it's important that you have proactive communication, you're transparent with the communication, because I think the cover-up is more
Damning than the mistake
than the crime,
Right.
right? So let's. I think that's important that everyone needs to know. That's out there, who's listening. The cover-up is more important than the crime. So.
Then having the client understand after that exactly how that's not going to happen again. I think that's important as
And
well.
that goes
just
back to the
ensure-
actionable next steps.
Yep.
And I think that's very, very important.
It all comes together.
It all
It
comes
does.
together.
It does. It's
Chapel.
a dance. I told you. It's a
You're
dance.
right, it is a dance.
And once it comes together, it's a beautiful country line dance, and everybody's synchronized.
That's your go-to example of like a great
Country
dance,
line.
country line dance.
That's correct.
Not like a tango.
Nope. Tuesday nights at Water Street, country line dancing.
Another plug. You're just plugging everything here.
We're gonna dive into little tips and tricks here for how we can accomplish this. I'll kick it off. I think one important thing that has saved my butt countless times is if there is an important email or if there is a long email that I'm sending, I will write my response in a Google Doc or in a Word doc every time before that. I'll make sure that I've read it through. If it's one where it's, someone was coming at you hot, I'll leave for a little bit, come back to it, make
Take the
sure that it's
emotion
right.
out of it.
Exactly, but it's reviewing that and making sure that everything in that email is exactly what you want to say. I think it's important because a well-crafted and helpful and organized response the first time can completely diffuse a situation and set up to just focus on repair mode rather than just a ping pong match of, back and forth negativity.
Grammarly is also really great. If you don't want to just throw it in a Google Doc, all you have to do is turn that app on. There's a plug-in there. It saves me so much time. And also, Grammarly also will send you a report back weekly, and you can see, what can be better.
I like that it gives you like the little emojis to tell you the tone of your email.
Yeah. And their content, their blogs, they actually have a lot of information on how to make your messages better, more clear, more organized. So
We talked about keeping communication organized, right? Emails can be messy, right? I know there's a lot of email systems out there and ways you can use email to your benefit. I mean, we're getting hundreds of emails a day. There's a way to keep everything organized. I know you have a way to do that. If you want to share some ways we could do that,
I'll go.
All right.
So for effective email organization, I have a completed folder for every one of my emails. I will go through my inbox. I'll star what's important, what I have to take action on, move the rest once I've read it to the completed folder, And then as I take action on those emails throughout the day, move those to the completed folder. By the end of the day, and really mostly by the end of the week, I like to have my inbox completely wiped out, so I'm almost starting fresh the next week. And maybe if there's something lingering, then it's important, but I'm never bringing more than a handful of emails into the next day, and I'm not losing anything that might be on page 5, the next day of my email folder. It's starred, it's there at the bottom. I know that I haven't yet taken action on it, and it's saved me countless times.
I think a lot of people here adopted that, and I think it really works really, really well. I think the overriding tool that we use here for communication to wrap things up is teamwork, right? With so many moving parts, right? You got links for a particular campaign. We can have multiple links. You can have multiple creatives. You can have multiple campaigns. What we use is teamwork, right? And I think it's extremely effective just how we're able to manage over 2,000 clients a month. And it's all really through teamwork, where all the messages are organized, all the communications are organized, all the files are organized, all the creatives are organized, all the links are organized. The people that really need to see information is filtered out, so they're only seeing the information they need to. I think it's an effective tool that I think everyone should look into, because it really works. It's a project management tool, yes, but it really allows us. It's a tool for success in the communication space, and I think it's really helped us out, and I think it brings a lot of value to everyone else out there.
Teamwork, send us free stuff.
Teamwork makes the dream work.
So just to kind of like wrap up the tips and tricks, I think the last thing we could talk about is kind of tying it back to the communication externally. So we have our live report where it's not just where the client or the manager can go and look at all the data, it's somewhere where we actually communicate. So we have those narratives that we're writing for them, and it all ties back into tailoring your message to the end client, right? So everything we put in there is put in layman's terms, and it's something they want to see. So if they have a certain goal for their campaign, you can rest assured, like, that's what we're going to talk about in that live report. And I think stuff like that and tailoring it to that audience is so important. So when they do read that narrative and there is that extra step of communication, they know exactly what we're talking about, and they can just refer to that.
And if they're giving feedback on that, clients giving feedback on the direction of their campaign is how you keep them. When it's been 3 months, 4 months, and the client hasn't given you any feedback, and you just hope that you're running it the way that they want, that's just start the countdown to churn, because it's coming. So actively communicating to them in the tool that they're using to see their data, we found has been very helpful to get feedback.
Yeah, it's just an extra way we can also recommendations, just talk about optimizations we've made. It's just an extra way that they can see something, or that we've been working on their campaign without even externally communicating them any other way. They just have that access to that.
Yeah, well, wrapping things up to the conversation we had, the most effective communication is a story with an image. We talked about that earlier, right? We built our entire reporting system around telling a story with data, but having the narrative along with that story. And I think that's really a big, big differentiator that we've put in play and learned over time to really implement, and it's really been the most successful for that we've seen in the past couple of years.
It's digestible, and it's nicely organized, so people love it.